Welcome to The Smart Divorce on Divorce Source Radio, helping you move forward with focus, hope, and confidence. I'm Deborah Moskovich, divorce consultant, educator, and author of The Smart Divorce. Along with my co-host, Steve Peck, we're going to bring you the leading experts and researchers in the divorce arena. And we're also going to speak with those in the trenches, people who have learned from their own divorce and how that experience has changed their lives. And they would tell you for the better. I've learned that divorce can be a beginning, even if it looks like an end. Hey, Steve, how are you today?
Hello, Deborah. Welcome to Divorce Source Radio.
This is such a pleasure. We've got great shows planned for you because divorce can be rich in opportunity to learn and grow from. You've got to learn from those experiences, and each show is going to look at a different topic or issue. You'll see you're not alone. And if there's something you'd like us to talk about, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So email us at info@thesmartdivorce.com or divorcesourceradio@gmail.com. There you go.
You're going to learn that. You're new here, kiddo. I
am.
I want to tell the listeners how we came about doing this Smart Divorce show with you. We had you as a guest on Divorce Source Radio a year ago, and the listener response was off the hook. People loved your message, and so I'm just so happy that you agreed to do your own show here.
I'm thrilled you invited me. And, this just goes to show you that dreams really do come true. I'm so passionate about educating people about divorce because I did not have the smart divorce. I kind of had the stupid divorce.
Oh, really?
And there's so many mistakes that I've made. And as I began to rebuild my life, I really wanted to understand what made divorce so difficult, because as I started to meet new people and talk to people about divorce, I noticed a kind of a theme. There was a lot of bitterness and angry people. I didn't want to be like that. Steve, I've got 3 kids. Mm-hmm. I want to be a great role model. I wanted my kids to grow up without that emotional baggage of being children of divorce. Mm-hmm. So I started speaking with the most high-profile divorce experts across North America, and I learned what being smart about divorce means. It's removing the emotion outside of the legal process.
How did you get the idea to reach out and talk to experts?
It was after my file closed. Would you believe my file was open for 7 very long and expensive years?
No, you said that in our show. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. And that is a really good point about litigating, how long that process can take, but also how the emotions can really derail the divorce process. So it got to the point where I wasn't really quite sure what we were fighting over anymore. And as I started to move on and speak with my lawyers, I got a lot smarter, though, in terms of doing a cost-benefit analysis. Okay, like, is this battle really worth it? How much am I willing to spend to get a certain result?
Well, let me ask you this, Deborah. Were your attorneys really helping you throughout this process, or were they trying to ramp things up? Because I know sometimes attorneys can really ramp the whole divorce process up.
I have to say that my last set of lawyers, so I went through a couple of different lawyers, which is not uncommon in the divorce arena. A lot of people go through several lawyers. So that's something that I've learned, and something that I talk about is how important it is to really do your due diligence at the beginning and a consultation. Like I went to this lawyer he's an excellent lawyer, has a great reputation. He just wasn't the right lawyer for me at the beginning. So I was with this lawyer for several months and then went to another lawyer who happened to do a lot of traveling, so wasn't going to be there for me when I needed to go to court. So you see, I didn't ask all the questions, and it wasn't until I got to the lawyers 3 and 4, and the reason why they're 3 and 4 is they're partners. One managed the child-related issues, and the other one was on the financial side of things, until I really started to learn how to use my lawyers more efficiently, more effectively, how I could communicate better, how I should be cutting down on my legal bills and not calling for every little thing or writing little emails for every little thing.
Good point.
So were they ramping it up? No, I actually think that they were helping me. As a matter of fact, one of my lawyers said to me, don't engage and do what I do in business. Write an email and sit on it for 24 hours. So if you really feel that need to communicate whatever it is, whether it was to my ex-husband or whether it was to my lawyer, write that email and then just sit on it.
That's a great rule. I mean, how many times have you actually done that? And the next day, 24 hours later, you look at it and go, man, I'm glad I didn't send it,
Yeah, it's kind of, what is that drunken call, and you're sorry that you made that call.
I've never made one, Deborah.
Neither have I. I've just read about them. But, it's in that anger and in that frustration and in that revenge and everything else, people act out and do things that they later come to regret.
Do you think women do that more than guys?
I think divorce is emotional for both men and women. So men will do things and say things that are not nice, and women will do and say things that aren't nice. I see that in my divorce consulting practice now all the time. And I'm thrilled to have the speaker, Robert Simon, today. We're going to talk about what happens in the first few weeks of the divorce process when that D word is finally said. In my practice, I see people saying things that just astound me, because they don't want the relationship to end, or they're so angry with the ending of that relationship that they say things. Mm-hmm. So whether it's men or women, my practice is, I would say, 60% women, 40% men. They both act out in the same ways.
I mean, I talked to a man's divorce attorney the other day, and I asked him the question, who gets angrier? And he said, it's kind of even, unless there's an affair. And sometimes if the man is the one that had the affair, the woman really reacts to that in a negative way.
Right. And then the frustrating thing is, it's the battle over money. He or she's not going to get a dime out of me. Or when they really feel wronged, I'm going to take him for every penny he's got, or she, or whatever it is, right? People will talk about their anger and their frustration, but we've got no-fault divorce, so the reasons behind the divorce don't matter. And that, for some people, can be debilitating because they don't have a recourse. So although they might have been really unjustly wronged, it's still 50-50, or whatever that jurisdiction says that the law, whatever that jurisdiction says in terms of how the assets are to be divided. Or what if your partner deceived you so badly, but they were still a good parent, and then they still have great access to your children. For some parents, that's very frustrating. Although it's wrong to think that that parent shouldn't have a relationship with their kids. There's no such thing as revenge in divorce. It's called legal bills. Oh, the emotions are just rampant. It's just a kaleidoscope of emotions. And I say it's like the Rocky Mountains. There's so many ups and downs. You think you're moving forward, and then you've got to go to court, or you get a letter from your lawyer, and then there's this huge setback, and then you sort of, you're progressing along again, and then something else happens and sets you back. Sometimes it's, 3 steps forward and 10 steps back. Mm-hmm. You can't expect to get over it overnight. And when I read about some of these divorces, that they settle within weeks, I think that's fabulous. But wow, people don't heal emotionally, and I think sometimes it's going to catch up with them later.
Do you think that in these high conflict divorces that a lot of those are fueled by affairs?
Well, that's one of the reasons.
There's got to be something, right, Deborah, that makes you so angry? And I mean, if a relationship just broke down, I don't know how you can get overly angry about that.
There are 3 things you need to do to keep a relationship intact: trust, communication, and compromise. As soon as you lose that trust with your partner, I think that's when the conflict starts to become apparent, and that's when the anger and the frustration. So, of course, an affair, infidelity is there 100%. I've been reading a lot about the contributing factors towards divorce, and another one is financial infidelity. A lot of couples don't share their finances. They don't let each other know what they've been spending, what debts they have, how much they earn, whatever it is. They're being deceived about their finances. So there's a lot of anger around that as well, which is really interesting. So that is one thing. If a couple isn't communicating effectively, there's the emotional affair. So although there isn't the physical intimacy, there's still the emotional intimacy. So I can understand why that these reasons would contribute to the anger.
I think the emotional intimacy thing happens a lot. I mean, how many married couples do you see going through marriage and they're not that happy? From talking to them that their sexual life is not that great. For some, they have a sexless marriage. And so obviously they're not being paid attention to, and then they run into somebody at work and they're paying attention to them, and that's the start of it all.
Absolutely. And years ago, it used to be that men were the ones that were having more affairs than women. And now, because more and more women are in positions of power and have great jobs, it's roughly the same, which I thought was very interesting. Because people stereotype about affairs and the emotional infidelity and all sorts of things. But, the times are a-changing.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what went wrong? I know you don't want to get totally personal here, but I'm sure some of our listeners want to know how you came through your divorce into the smart divorce.
Good questions, because I didn't go through the smart divorce. Well, I was married for 11 years, and I had 3 children. But it's interesting from the conversation that we had in terms of relationship breakdown. And so I really didn't believe in the D word. I didn't believe in divorce. I really wanted to make my marriage work and did everything I could. But of course, when you lose the trust, it didn't work for me any longer. I couldn't stay in that marriage. So I decided that I really needed to leave, but I was racked with guilt, so much guilt. And because of that, I ended up going through therapy first before I told my husband that I wanted to leave the marriage. So, you know what, though? But it's been interesting because I really wanted to understand what made divorce so difficult. As we talked earlier, and there's all these bitter and angry people. So I started to write The Smart Divorce, but even going through the divorce process, it was the guilt that I felt about my children growing up in 2 separate households. So I went to therapy, and, a lot of my friends have standing appointments, weekly appointments going for hair and nails. I had my weekly appointment with my shrink, but I used to call him my mechanic, and it was kind of like my emotional mechanic. So I used to say to somebody, because I didn't want to say, I'm going to my shrink, I'm going to my shrink, I'm going to my shrink. I said, I'm going to my mechanic. And then someone said, why don't you sell your car already? There's always something wrong. But anyhow, I went to my shrink, and I thought that it was very helpful to kind of look at what would happen post-divorce. Now, the interesting thing is, as much as I could see my life without my partner, I really couldn't see how my life would unfold. We came up with different scenarios, but the truth is, who would have thought that I'd be sitting here talking to Steve Peck, who I met last year when you interviewed me for Divorce Source Radio.
It's a funny world,
isn't it now? And so I really did learn that you have choices, and I learned that I could sit and be a victim and feel sorry for myself. But really, that wouldn't be helping my kids very much, because I would be a horrible role model. And I believe that happy parent, happy child. So I needed to find a way to make myself happy. And the choices I made were to move on. Now, towards the end, we did go through marriage counseling, couples counseling, which is something that I suggest to all my clients today. Because sometimes if a couple can't communicate effectively, they need to bring in a third party. You end up falling into the same relationship patterns. Like, I see this all the time, don't you? Even amongst your friends or just acquaintances, I see people fall into these bad patterns that they don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to fight effectively, and they end up just hurting each other's feelings. So one of the things that I did do going through the process and leading up to my divorce is what I talk about in my Smart Divorce book. And that is, you've got to do everything you can to justify your decision, because as bad as things could get, as difficult, like for me, as high conflict as things got, as financially difficult, or the issues that I might have had with my children, I've never looked back and said, I should have worked hard at my marriage, which I hear so many people saying, or I think I made a bad decision.
You never did?
Never looked back, because I did everything I could, I felt, to make it work or to overcome some of the obstacles that were standing in the way. But for me, as soon as I lost that trust, that was it. Trust is a very difficult thing to really put back. At least it was for me. So as soon as you lose trust and respect, for me, that's a relationship breaker. And it was a process for me. Although I was the one that wanted to leave the marriage, it was still a process. I cried myself to sleep every night for a year when I knew that this was a decision I had to make. So there you go. It's really emotional for the one that wants to leave and the one that was left.
Hey, so what other kind of subjects are we going to talk about on the Smart Divorce?
There's so many topics. We're going to talk about, I think that we got to look at the progress of divorce. Like, what's the divorce process? The first few weeks when the D word is finally announced. And then what do you go from there? Like, what's the grieving process? What are your children going through? What's alternative dispute resolution? Like, what is negotiation? I sort of, what negotiation is, but when you're in it, like for me, I really wasn't sure what's this four-way meeting, what's the letters between the lawyers, how involved am I going to be? I think it's really important to explore each dispute resolution, negotiation, mediation, collaborative family law. What's the difference between arbitration and litigation? So we're going to cover all that. And then there's so many other things, like in terms of preparing yourself for the next significant relationship. People get divorced. I just had a client the other day who said, I don't really care if I never get married again. And then she rethought that and said, but I can't see not having someone whose company I enjoy. So we're going to talk about relationships, but not repeating the same pattern so that you're going to get hooked up with the person you just left.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to do that kind of thing. We're going to talk about blended families. We're going to talk about how to blend families. We're going to talk about kids in relationships. What about multiple divorce? I think that did you know that with each subsequent marriage, the divorce rate rises?
Yes, I did.
So we can talk about why that happens and how to avoid it. So conversations that you need to have, the impact of these multiple relationships on your children, and so much more. And listeners, if you want us to talk about something, please let us know, because we'd love to bring you the leading thinkers and experts on any topic that you can think of. We've got a great guest today. We're going to talk to Dr. Robert Simon. Today's show is about beginnings. I want to talk, as I mentioned several times already, the start of the divorce process. So we've got the guest to advise us. It's Robert Simon, a psychologist whose work focuses on divorce, relationships, and families, with a particular focus and specialty in children of divorce and custody conflicts. He's frequently called upon by the courts to conduct comprehensive psychological evaluations that result in making recommendations to the court that are in the children's best interest. Dr. Simon is also retained by divorce lawyers to review other psychologist reports and assist in developing strategy in litigating divorces. As you can see, divorce is really complex. We've got experts within so many different arenas dealing with divorce. Dr. Simon, welcome to Divorce Source Radio. I want to explore the first few weeks when a couple, or more likely, one person wants to end the marriage. It takes two to marry and one to divorce. So, first of all, in the midst of a heated argument and someone says, I want a divorce, they just blurt that out. And I've got so many clients that will come to my office and say that same thing. My husband or my wife, they're so angry, they just said, I want a divorce. Do you really think it's final? Do you not think that they can slow things down a little bit, try to get rid of a bit of that steam, and see if they can put their marriage back on track?
Well, I think that divorce is never something to take lightly, because divorce is an extremely complex process in the lives of people. It's a very complex emotional process, it's a complex legal process, and it's a complex financial process. So I think that divorce is not something to take lightly. And in my view, there's no reason to rush into getting a divorce. You can always elect to become divorced when you're ready. But until the time that you feel a sense of clarity within yourself, or a sense of understanding that divorce is for you what you believe to be your best option, I'm all in favor for couples to continue to talk, to continue to problem solve, to continue to explore possibilities.
Yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes, though, couples have a difficult time communicating. So they might need the help of a third party, like a couples counselor or a marriage counselor. So How do you suggest people find a good counselor? What are some of the questions that they ask when they're doing their due diligence and finding the right help?
Therapists, counselors come in many stripes, and even though divorce is a fairly common thing, and even though most, if not all, psychotherapists have been in relationships and have had relationship problems, I think it's important to recognize that relationship therapy, couples therapy, is a specialty, is an area of focus, and is something where good couples therapists have a specific skill set that they've developed. In terms of finding a therapist, I think one of the best places to go is to your friends in your support system and to people who regularly come into contact with couples that may be having difficulty. For example, physicians, clergy, teachers, people that in the course of their lives and in the course of their work come across couples who are having some difficult times. Talking to friends who may have had a couples counselor is also a good way to get a referral. And I think it's important that when you decide to get any kind of professional therapy, that you get several names and contact and even interview more than one person. Great therapists and great clients are not always a good match. I mean, a fine human being with a great therapist, sometimes the chemistry's not there. And therapy is a relationship just like anything else. And so you want to find a relationship that you feel is going to work.
Dr. Simon, what do you think about couples that seek out their friends for therapy?
I absolutely think that if you have a friend who's a therapist, that is the wrong person for you to take on as your couples therapist. Being a therapist to someone requires a certain amount of emotional detachment, a certain amount of neutrality that you cannot have when you've got a real world relationship with one or both members of a couple. So what you can do is be a friend, but you can't be their therapist.
Deborah, do you see that happening with your clients, that they confide in a friend almost like a therapist and they're not really getting good information because it's biased?
I see that all the time. People are confiding in other individuals, and they are also projecting their own feelings. And so if they don't like your partner, they're going to encourage you one way or another. And sometimes they're not even the best advice person. So I agree with Dr. Simon. You really should go to the right professional. And in terms of going to the right professional, Dr. Simon, some people also have other issues that aren't part of the marriage. They just have personal issues that they've never confronted. Do you think they should deal with this through their marriage counselor?
Well, when you go into marriage counseling, you go into marital therapy, many of your own personal issues or difficulties will come up because they're certainly likely to be implicated in whatever it is that's going on in your difficulties with your partner. But I don't think that people who need or want their own individual therapy should look at the couples therapy as a place to get individual work done, because couples therapy is about communication. It's about problem solving in a relationship. It's about the relationship. Marriage therapy is focused on the issues in the relationship, on compromise, on communication skills, on being able to speak clearly to your partner and listen well to your partner, to addressing things that take place between the couple. And the goals are goals that the couple has for their relationship, whereas a person who's got some of their own individual issues or concerns that they'd like to address, that is a different approach, a different kind of work, a different kind of therapy. And that individual is probably well advised to take that up in their own individual treatment. Now, that said, I think it's important to recognize that whatever issues or difficulties any of us have, we're likely to take with us into our relationship. And therefore, some of those issues may come up in the couples therapy. I know that when I see couples in psychotherapy and an individual issue in one or perhaps even in both members of the couple comes up and clearly is something that needs attention, I then suggest and refer them for their own individual therapy if they're not already in individual therapy.
Right. Do you ever suggest to couples when they really can't communicate, it's just awful, there's a lot of conflict, and you know that they've decided that they're going to divorce, do you help them through the divorce? Like, do you help them communicate between each other how they're going to separate effectively?
Yes, I think that there is absolutely a role for a skilled couples therapist to help a couple separate and divorce well, to help them cut through some of the issues and some of the conflict that does not need to get exaggerated or become larger during the course of it. To have a neutral help them make decisions that are in the best interest of their children, that are in each of their own individual best interests. Remember that when a couple decides to divorce, they have been in one another's lives loving, supportive people in each other's lives, and it's really difficult to lose your friend, even when you're angry at them. So sometimes a skilled couples therapist can help a couple separate well and even be supportive of one another through the process. That bodes well for their ability to move on with their lives when the divorce is over, and that's very, very important.
Right. That's a good point, because they often say that the dynamics of the relationship play out in the divorce. So if you had, for instance, a controlling partner, then they're going to try to be very controlling during the divorce process, or if they're angry, or if they're very detail-oriented.
When you say that dynamics play a role in a divorce, I would agree with that, as Dr. Simon may as well. But in a divorce like mine and a lot of other divorces, there wasn't the animosity until the divorce.
Right, because those are hurt feelings and there's a lot of anger.
Some couples, as you know, may be conflict avoidant. And it isn't until they actually get into the middle of the divorce process or into the divorce process that they're able to recognize some of the feelings that they have or some of the thoughts that they have that lead to conflict. Because during their marriage they've been conflict avoidant, or they haven't learned how to process difficulties or disagreements. As the divorce unfolds and the conflict becomes laid bare, they don't have the skills as a couple to process the conflict, and things can become very, very difficult.
Right. So I would think then that at the beginning of the divorce process, one of the first people you call is not your lawyer, but is a therapist.
Well, I'm not sure I would agree that the first person you call is a therapist. I think that one of the first things that you do is you gather your support system. You gather your family, you gather your friends, you gather people who are a part of your support system, and you talk with them. Divorce is not a disorder. Divorce is not a disease. Divorce is an event or a process in people's lives. Not everybody going through divorce needs to work with a therapist. That's not always needed. What is always needed is a support system, and a therapist can be a part of the support system. It never hurts to work with a therapist, but I don't want people to believe that because they choose not to go to a therapist that they're not doing the right thing, because it's not always necessary.
I've heard couples say that, we're afraid to go to counseling because once we start talking, then everything's going to blow up. So can that happen in therapy?
Yes, certainly. A couple who goes to therapy that has been fundamentally conflict avoidant, part of the goal of the therapy, I believe, should be to help them learn to open up and address their conflict. And as I said earlier in answer to the previous question, if they don't have the skills to do that, it can be very uncomfortable. But nothing takes place in therapy that's involuntary. Nobody can make you talk about something you don't want to talk about. Nobody can make you feel something that you don't want to feel. And while a lot of people in therapy will confront and come face to face with feelings or issues that are scary for them or make them anxious, and while many people sometimes can feel that they're going to fall apart and never be put back together again, you know what? That doesn't happen.
No, but you know what? I think Steve raised a good point. And we talked about those conflict avoiders, and maybe there are some issues within that relationship that are really bothering one of the partners, but they don't raise that issue because A, they don't know how to raise that issue, and B, they know that it's going to cause a lot of conflict, whatever that issue is. So by bringing it to therapy and, to the marital counselor and, by discussing it, I think they might be afraid of what the resolution might be.
I can only wonder if they would have known how to communicate earlier, would they even be in divorce at this time?
Yeah, good point.
All of those things are entirely true or possible. I mean, divorce can happen because a couple does not know how to communicate. A couple does not know how to problem solve. And if they go to a therapist and learn over time some communication skills that they've lacked, learn over time some negotiation and problem solving skills that they've lacked, that can improve the marriage and make the divorce something that the partners no longer feel is necessary.
What about the couples that are divorcing for sure? Like, that it's going to happen. One partner wants to move forward like tomorrow, and the other partner is just in denial and has it's just he or she's just reeling from the conversation and is just not ready to move forward and is getting all this pressure. How do you slow it down?
Well, that does happen. That happens not infrequently, in fact. And what I would tell you is that my guess is that in the majority of these cases, that dynamic between the couple of one person moving at a slower pace than the other person moves in terms of making decisions or things like that is going to come up again in the divorce.
Yeah.
The person who wants to move slowly and slow it down simply by moving slowly. There's really, again, I think there's no need to rush into it. And while it may be frustrating for the individual who wants to kind of plunge headlong into it, you can't move any faster than the slowest person in your group.
That's right.
And that person, I think, needs to be afforded the respect and dignity of processing the issues in their own way and in their own time. Now, the person who's in a rush may have particular reasons for being in a rush. Perhaps they've fallen in love with somebody else and wish to get married or things like that. Sometimes compromises are needed to meet the needs of both parties, the hurried party and the slow party. But what's important to recognize is that this difference between the couple is likely a difference that's been there a long time. It's probably nothing new.
Yeah. Although I also see couples that, I only see usually just one individual will come into my office and he or she will say, but they want to tell the kids like right away and we've got to figure out where we're going to move and all this other stuff. But do you really think you need to tell the kids right away? And if you do tell the kids, like, how do you do it?
Telling the children that you're getting divorced is a very important thing and a very complicated thing to do. There's a couple of principles in terms of talking to the children that I'd love to share with the listeners to the program. First and foremost, it's always best if the parents do it together. Remember that the children still have two parents. And to the extent that the parents are able to do this together, that creates a much safer holding environment for the children, that they see that the parents, even though they are separating, can be decent and civil and cooperative with each other. And it shows the children in terms of behavior that each of the parents still loves them, is still there for them, and supports their relationship with the other parent. The thing that children are often concerned about when they hear about a divorce is what kind of changes are going to happen that are going to affect them. Are they going to have to give up their room in the house? Are they going to have to move? Are they changing schools? Are they changing sports teams? Where are their friends going to be? So I think it's really important to listen carefully for what the children's specific concerns are about their lives and answer those questions and do the very best that you can to anticipate what they're going to be, to reassure them that while mom and dad are getting divorced and while there will be two homes, that they're going to be in the same school, their friends aren't going anywhere, that you're going to do everything you can do to keep them involved in their activities, whether it's sports or scouts or whatever they're involved in. That the first thing that you want to do for your children is give them a sense of continuity and sameness in the areas that you can give that to them in, and reassure them that although you are getting divorced, that you both love them, that it's not their fault, and that they're going to be spending a good deal of time with each of you. I think those are very important things. Also, think carefully about the age of your children and how much they can understand. I think it's important to give them information that they need to know, information that impacts their life, but it's important not to overload them at first, because like anybody else going through a divorce, they can get overwhelmed as well.
Dr. Simon, Deborah and I were talking about this exact same thing about age earlier today, and I used to think that there was a better age to get divorced for the kids, better age of a child to understand divorce. And I've come to learn that maybe there's not a better age. I mean, if they're 20, they won't accept it maybe any better than a 10-year-old.
There's never a good time for divorce for children. And there's not a particular time or age that's better for children than other times. It's a difficulty for kids. Waiting till the kids are out of the house, waiting till they get through college, those are not typically good rationales for timing your divorce. There is no good time for divorce. There's just when you choose to do it.
Right. I was astounded to read the statistic. 5% of parents actually sit down and tell their children that they're separating. I was shocked.
Really?
And maybe if more parents, I'm hoping that we have listeners that are really paying attention to what Dr. Simon's saying, because if parents paid more attention to what they needed to tell their children, maybe the fears of how divorce is going to affect their children won't be as severe.
Well, I think that what you're talking about, Deborah, is that when parents actually take responsibility for communicating to their children about what's going on in their lives, then they have some control over the information that the children are going to get. If the kids find out in some other way about the divorce, they're not in control of the first pieces of information that the kids have. And those first pieces of information have the potential to set the tone for how they process and how they experience things going forward. I think also that divorce is something that happens to children. It's not a decision that the kids make. It's a decision that parents make, and sometimes, often, it's a decision that one of the parents make. And it's a decision that dramatically impacts the lives of the children without their consent or even consulting with them. So I think that it is fundamentally respectful of the children, fundamentally respectful of their needs, of their vulnerability, that the parents be the ones that communicate to them about what is taking place in the family. And again, whenever possible, to do it together.
Right. You know what else I find in my practice? That I've got clients coming in and telling me the horrible things that they've said to their partner, or maybe that their partner have said to them, because they're so emotional. I mean, the decision to divorce is just so fresh, and they've said the worst things that your former best friend has just said to you.
What I know is that the ugly or impulsively angry things that you can say to your spouse or your soon-to-be former spouse at the outset of a divorce can absolutely set the tone for how the divorce proceeds. If you say something like, I won't pay you child support, I will see you living on the streets before I give you a penny, game on. The war has started versus a process has started. So I think those things are they can be very damaging from the outset. You asked if they can cause problems. Yes, they absolutely can cause problems, if only to set a more negative tone than otherwise needs to be set in a divorce. So I think when we're very emotional, when we're under a lot of pressure, when we've got a lot going on inside of us, is a time to take a breath, step back, and think carefully about what comes out of our mouths.
And maybe would you agree that maybe you should start scripting conversations, almost like jot your thoughts down so that you don't blurt the things out that you're later going to come to regret?
That can be a really helpful thing for some people who really like to draft things out, to script things out, to sketch them out. That can be really super helpful. And if you're very, very emotional, that's a great way to think your thoughts through completely before you say them.
Right.
You know, what I'm going to tell you is that I think at first, giving information, less is more. When kids hear the word divorce, it's like they go on panic alert. And it's very difficult. People go on panic alert. It's very difficult when we're very aroused, when we're anxious, or when we have a lot of emotions going on, to process a lot of information. If they're not okay with it, they need to go through a period of not being okay with it. It's only respectful and a part of their coping and hopefully healing through the divorce. So I think when you're giving kids and talking at first about what's going on in their lives, be very careful about what you say and how much information you try to flood them with. And be careful not to talk to them and say certain things to them because it makes you feel good to say it to them. It's not about you, it's about them.
Well, I do know many people who say, I didn't want this divorce, and I'm going to tell the kids that it was your father or your mother that wanted the divorce, and these are the reasons why. I wanted to keep everyone together, in that really angry voice. So what do you say to those people?
If I can say one thing to parents about how to help their children cope with divorce and come through the divorce whole and healthy, it is do not disparage your other parent, the other parent. Don't blame, don't badmouth the other parent. Don't talk ugly about the other parent. At worst, be neutral. At best, be supportive. But that kind of information is not something children need. I call that the adult issues, and we keep kids out of the adult issues.
I think sometimes when a couple is divorcing and their kids are adults, they feel that they can confide in them more.
Well, they're still their children, and the children still have parental attachments to both parents. And bad-mouthing one parent to the children, even when they're adults, is still harmful to them, and something that I absolutely counsel parents to avoid at all times and at all ages.
And you know what? You're still a parent. No matter how old your child is, you don't want to turn them into your friend.
I'll tell you this. I mean, many parents who have older teenage children or adult children, that child will come to them and say something about, Mom, I bet I understand that one of the things about Dad that bothers you is da-da-da-da-da, because I notice that he does that to me too. That is not an opportunity for you to respond by saying, you're absolutely right, it drives me crazy when he does that. But it is an opportunity for you to say something to the kid like, that is something that's very, very difficult to cope with. It's very hard to struggle with. I'm really proud of you for identifying something that frustrates you, and maybe you and Dad can sit down and talk about that. So you avoid the setup to be negative. It's hard to do, especially when you're thinking on your feet, but It is the right thing to do.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. I think you've really helped our listeners understand what it means to be smart about divorce.
Thanks, Dr. Simon.
Thank you, guys.
Wow, Steve, that was great information. I only wish that I knew some of that at the beginning of my divorce, because that would have really helped me be a lot smarter about my divorce.
Yeah, me too. He's a very bright guy.
He is. I found that at the beginning, I second-guessed myself a lot, and I capitulated. I did tell my children about the divorce process, but now I understand how to better prepare. And I think that people need to really understand how to better prepare themselves emotionally, their children, and think things through and not rush it. All too often, people just want it over with.
They do. And, I agreed with the way he wanted you to present it to kids, but at the same time, it takes a very mature person going through a high conflict divorce to be able to be that mature and sit down and just act the way he was suggesting you act. Again, I agree with him. It's just not always that easy.
It's not. You know what I do in my consulting practice? I suggest to my client to go see a parenting expert to help them with the script and to help them with the questions that they might need to consider and how to help their children. Because the truth is, who's ready to do this in the first couple of weeks? The concept of divorce is just so fresh. And, one person is usually just reeling from the decision because it wasn't their choice. So you have to cope personally with this, right? And then you've got to help your children cope through this. I don't know. It's so hard to keep it all together. So I love bringing in other experts. There's a lot of people, myself included, don't have that maturity at the beginning when you're just so emotional. That's when the conflict ramps up again. So if you bring in a neutral third party, a parenting expert who's going to help you with that, it puts you in a totally different sphere, 6 months down the line because you've done the right things up front. And people will say to me, well, you're telling me to bring in this expert and that expert. Isn't it a lot of money? But the truth is, it's a lot of money to go back and repair mistakes. And once words are said, you can't take them back. So you might as well have someone help you say it properly.
Yeah, Good point. What did you think about when Dr. Simon said to gather your friends, family, coworkers, and use them as support? Because earlier in the program, I talked to him about using your friends as a sort of therapist, and that wasn't a good idea, but yet now we want to rally your friends, family, and coworkers to help you through this.
Well, I think it's important to have a support network. I do, and I do agree with Dr. Simon. I agree with what he said about not using them as a therapist, but using them as your support network. If you're home alone on a Saturday night and you're feeling lonely, you can't call a therapist, but you can certainly call a friend who, will give you a shoulder to cry on, or you can go and just hang out at a movie together, or just at someone's home, just someone there to check in on you. I mean, it makes you feel really good that somebody cares, because all of a sudden you've lost your best friend. You seem to have lost the person that you trusted and cared for most, other than your children, like in life. So at least you know that people are around you, they care. And I think that's helpful. But the thing is, you don't want to be talking about it all the time. And they shouldn't be forcing you to talk about this all the time. Sometimes you just want someone to listen or to distract you.
Yeah, I get that. And probably women do it better than men, right?
Yeah, women are listeners. Yeah, men are more like problem solvers. And sometimes you don't want a problem to be solved right then and there. You just want someone to listen to you. And, of course, to share that tub of Haagen-Dazs or something,
You guys share the Haagen-Dazs. We share the beer.
Yeah, exactly. So there you have it. But if anyone wants to see what Dr. Simon has to say, he also has some interesting FAQs on his website. You might want to go to www.dr-simon.com.
And Deborah, if people want to write you and give you show suggestions or have questions for you, what's the email address?
Love to hear from you. info@thesmartdivorce.com.
Or you can write Deborah through divorcesourceradio@gmail.com. Don't forget, Deborah and the Smart Divorce airs on Divorce Source Radio weekly. And you can hear Divorce Source Radio on iTunes or on our own website, divorcesourceradio.com. If you want to be notified when new programs are available, you can follow us on Twitter. Our follower, Deborah, are you writing this down, is Divorce Source. I know you're a big high-tech person, and you follow us on Twitter, right?
I do follow you on Twitter, and I'm a big fan on Facebook. So I am improving.
Great. I'm glad to hear it.
I'm working it. And listeners can also follow me on Twitter at The Smart Divorce. I had to think about that.
That's it. The Smart Divorce.
At The Smart Divorce. Follow at The Smart Divorce.
Well, hey, I thought it was a good first show, and look forward to many more with you, Deborah Moskovich.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Steve.
All right. We'll see you next week on The Smart Divorce with Deborah Moskovich on Divorce Source Radio.